We are talking about a network that constantly processes millions of variables, adapts to environmental changes in real time, and executes flawless mechanical actions. And it does all of this entirely without you having to consciously direct the individual parts.
Which is wild. So we're going to figure out how a completely intangible thought actually translates into physical force.
Yeah, and by the time we're done today, you're going to understand why your muscles eventually just, refuse to work when you're tired.
And how you can input a biological cheat code into your nervous system to become more flexible.
Oh, and the surprisingly counterintuitive mechanics of why our bodies lock up after we die.
That part is morbid, but so fascinating. So where do we start?
Well, to understand any of that, we have to start at the source. Because before a muscle can physically twitch, before you even take a breath, a command has to originate somewhere and travel to its destination. So the human nervous system is essentially split into two major territories. You have the central nervous system, or CNS, which is the brain and the spinal cord. And then you have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS.
Which is basically the entire highway system branching outward, right?
Exactly.
Because the research you shared details how we have these 12 pairs of cranial nerves that come right off the brain and 31 pairs of spinal nerves that exit the spine to connect every single region of your body back to the center.
Yep.
Let's make this tangible for a second. If we imagine the human body as a massive, sprawling global corporation, the brain is the CEO sitting in the corner office making the overarching executive decisions.
I like that analogy.
Thanks. And then the spinal cord is the main high-speed fiber optic trunk line running straight down the center of the building. And the peripheral nervous system, those are the local routers and regional managers.
That's a really accurate hierarchy, actually. And the role of those regional routers is crucial. Because if the CEO sends a directive to move the arm, the local routers of the peripheral network ensure that signal is delivered specifically to the bicep.
Instead of accidentally firing off a command to the calf muscles?
Exactly. It maintains order.
But let's look at that corner office for a second, because the sheer density of the processing power there is just hard to comprehend. There's this specific region at the back of the brain called the cerebellum.
Oh, the cerebellum is fascinating.
Right. It accounts for only about 10% of the brain's total volume, but it contains roughly 50% of the entire brain's neurons.
Yeah, the packaging efficiency is just staggering.
50%.
I know, but it requires that density because the cerebellum is the control center for coordinating voluntary movements, balance, and motor learning.
Okay, so give me an example of that in action.
Sure. Think about a professional tennis player executing a fluid 120-mile-per-hour serve. The CEO might make the simple top-level decision to hit the ball right.
Just swing the racket.
Exactly. But it's the cerebellum that does the incredibly complex subconscious math. It times the firing sequence of the ankle, then the knee, the hip, the torso, the shoulder, and the wrist, all in precise millisecond intervals to generate that power.
So it's essentially the ultimate compression algorithm, taking a simple command and unpacking it into 1,000 tiny instructions. And when those instructions are finally sent down the trunk line to the muscles, the system divides the labor again, right? We have the somatic nervous system, which handles the voluntary stuff like swinging the racket.
Right.
But we also have the autonomic nervous system, which is managing the involuntary infrastructure.
Correct. The autonomic system is basically running your life support in the background. It regulates the sympathetic responses, which most people know is the fight or flight state, jacking up your heart rate, dilating your pupils.
The adrenaline response.
Yeah. And then it manages the parasympathetic responses, the rest and digest state that calms everything back down.
Okay, so the command is generated, whether it's voluntary or autonomic. But a command is useless if it doesn't arrive on time.
Right. Speed is everything.
And the wiring of the human body has a brilliant solution for speed. The nerves are wrapped in something called a myelin sheath. It's a fatty, lipid-rich covering that insulates the nerve fibers. It's a lot like the rubber casing around a copper electrical wire in your house.
It acts exactly like insulation, yeah.
Yeah.
It prevents the electrical signal from leaking out into surrounding tissues. But the biological design actually has a distinct advantage over a household wire.
This is not continuous, right?
Exactly. The myelin sheath isn't continuous. It has microscopic gaps at regular intervals, known as the nodes of Ranvier.
Right, because if the whole thing were wrapped, the electrical resistance would actually slow the signal down.
Yes.
So instead of traveling in a continuous wave, the electrical impulse literally jumps from gap to gap, skipping over the insulated sections entirely.
Precisely. It allows the impulse to volt down the nerve fiber exponentially faster than it could on an uninsulated wire. To put the importance of this in perspective, think about demyelinating conditions like multiple sclerosis.
Oh, right.
Yeah. When the body's immune system mistakenly attacks and degrades that myelin insulation, the signals don't just slow down. They dissipate, they short-circuit, and they fail to reach the muscles entirely.
Leading to a loss of motor control.
Exactly. That jumping mechanism is absolutely vital for human movement to function.
Okay, so we have this incredibly insulated high-speed wiring. But even with that speed, there's a fundamental problem of physics here, which is distance takes time.
Right.
If the CEO has to process every single input, there are situations where waiting for a decision is just a luxury we simply don't have.
Which is why the local routers have the authority to bypass the CEO completely during an emergency. And this is the mechanism of reflexes.
And we aren't just talking about a doctor tapping your knee with a rubber hammer to make your leg kick.
No, that's a basic single synapse reflex.
Right. The documentation you provided goes into much more complex multi-limb emergency responses. Let's say you're walking barefoot in your house, and you step squarely on a sharp tack.
Okay, so if you had to rely on standard processing, the sequence would be disastrous.
How so?
Well, the pain receptors in your foot would detect the tissue damage. They would send an electrical signal all the way up your leg, up your spinal cord, and into your brain.
Okay.
Then the brain would have to recognize the signal as pain, calculate a physical response, sequence the muscles needed to pull the foot away, and send that command all the way back down the leg.
But human nerves, even with the myelin sheath, only conduct signals at a finite speed.
Exactly.
So if we waited for that entire round-trip communication, the tack would be buried to the bone by the time the foot actually moved.
The tissue damage would be severe. So instead, the body uses what is known as the crossed extensor reflex.
The crossed extensor reflex. Could break that down.
So think about the microseconds after your foot hits that tack. The sensory receptors shoot a pain signal up the leg, but it only goes as far as the spinal cord.
Wait, it doesn't go to the brain at all?
Not initially, no.
No.
It hits the gray matter of the spinal cord and the signal splits. It connects to a localized network of interneurons.
Okay.
These interneurons instantly act as an emergency response team. Without asking the brain for permission, they fire a command back down to the injured leg, ordering the knee and hip to bend and yank the foot away from the tack.
But here's the part that really highlights the genius of the system, because I was reading this and I was just blown away.
Yeah.
If you just yank your foot up, your entire center of gravity shifts. You would fall over.
Right.
So what happens?
So in the exact same microsecond, those interneurons in the spinal cord fire a second command to your opposite leg, ordering those muscles to completely extend and lock.
Bracing against the floor to take on your full body weight.
You got it.
So let me get this straight. If I step on a tack, my spinal cord is literally coordinating a complex multi-limb response, shifting my weight, bracing one leg, lifting the other away from danger, all before I even know I've stepped on something sharp.
Yes. The localized network handles the emergency, saves the tissue, and then sends an after-action report up to the brain.
That is insane.
By the time the sensory signal reaches your cortex and you actually feel the pain of the tack, your foot is already hovering safely in the air.
That is profound. The pain is just an update on a crisis that has already been averted.
Exactly. It's an evolutionary necessity. But, as you noted, an emergency reflex is a blunt instrument. It's binary. The spinal cord only knows on or OF during a crisis. It just yanks the foot away with maximum force.
Right, which is great for attack, but terrible for daily life.
Right.
So if an emergency reflex is just yanking limbs around, how does the body switch from panic mode to precision mode?
That's a great question.
Because if I reach for a pencil, my hand is incredibly gentle. But if I go to the gym and try to pick up a heavy dumbbell, my arm braces and generates massive force.
And it's the exact same muscle in both scenarios.
Exactly. How does the CEO regulate the power output so I don't accidentally crush the pencil or, fail to lift the dumbbell?
So, to understand force regulation, we have to look at the fundamental architecture of movement, which is the motor unit.
Okay.
A motor unit consists of one single motor neuron coming from the spinal cord and the cluster of specific individual muscle fibers it connects to.
And the most counterintuitive part of this design is the all-or-none principle.
Yes.
Because if I'm lifting something light, my brain isn't sending a weak electrical signal to the muscle.
Bro, not at all. A motor neuron simply cannot generate a weak or a strong command. When the nerve fires, every single muscle fiber connected to it contracts to its absolute 100% maximum capacity.
You cannot fire a motor unit at half power.
Correct. So the body's method for creating delicate, precise movements versus massive, forceful movements relies on something called the innervation ratio.
The innervation ratio.
Right. This is simply the number of muscle fibers assigned to one single neuron.
Okay, the way I visualize this is by thinking about the lighting design in a massive building.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If you look at the muscles that control the subtle movements of your eyes, they have an incredibly low ratio. One neuron controls maybe 10 tiny muscle fibers.
Right.
It's like a dimmer switch in a restaurant that controls just a tiny cluster of perfect, delicate mood lighting. You can make microscopic adjustments by turning on just one small switch at a time.
That's a great way to put it. But then you look at the medial gastrocnemius, the large muscle in your calf.
The calf muscle, right.
That muscle isn't designed for delicate work. It's designed to forcefully push your entire body weight off the ground when you jump or run.
Right.
The average innervation ratio there is roughly 1,800 to 1.
So that's like a giant, heavy industrial lever on the factory floor. When you flip that one switch, it instantly turns on 1,800 massive floodlights all at once.
No, exactly.
There's no subtlety. It's just an explosion of force.
And your brain navigates this using the size principle.
Which is what?
Well, when you decide to pick up an object, your nervous system is incredibly energy efficient. It always recruits the smallest, lowest threshold motor units first.
So the mood lighting.
Right. If those few mood lights provide enough force to lift the pencil, the system stops there.
Okay.
But if you try to lift a heavy dumbbell, the brain senses the resistance and progressively flips the switches on the larger, more powerful motor units, the floodlights, until enough force is generated to move the weight. It's an automatic scaling system.
Okay, so the CEO sends the signal, it travels down the high-speed insulated wire, the spinal cord scales the power based on the size principle, and the switch is flipped at the motor unit. But what is mechanically happening inside that muscle to make it physically shorten? How do a bunch of biological cells actually create physical tension?
Okay, so for this, we have to zoom in to the microscopic level to a structure called the sarcomere.
The sarcomere.
Yeah, this is the tiny, repeating functional unit inside every single muscle fiber. Within the sarcomere, you have two distinct types of protein filaments overlapping each other. You have thick filaments made of a protein called myosin, and thin filaments made mostly of a protein called actin.
And the mechanical process is called the sliding filament model.
Yes.
The clearest way to picture this, I think, is an incredibly organized microscopic game of tug-of-war.
That's exactly what it is.
Right, so imagine the actin filaments are two ropes. The myosin filament sits right in the middle between them. Along the myosin are millions of tiny heads that look and act like little golf clubs.
Yeah, little golf clubs grabbing the rope.
So when the electrical signal finally arrives, these myosin heads reach out, grab onto the actin ropes, pull them closer together toward the center, let go, reach further down the rope, and grab again.
Exactly.
It's millions of tiny biological rowers pulling hand over hand, which physically shortens the entire muscle.
That tug of war is exactly what's happening. But those tiny rowers need two specific things to operate: access to the rope and the energy to pull it.
Okay, let's talk about access first.
Access is tightly controlled. When a muscle is just resting, there are two regulatory proteins, troponin and tropomyosin, that wrap around the actin ropes.
And they act like biological guardrails, physically blocking the myosin heads from grabbing on.
Right.
So the signal from the brain has to somehow remove the guardrails.
Yes, and it does that with calcium. When the nerve impulse hits the muscle fiber, it triggers a massive release of calcium ions.
Okay.
The calcium floods the area and binds to the troponin. This causes a structural shift that physically drags the tropomyosin guardrails out of the way, exposing the binding sites on the rope.
Okay, so the guardrails are down, the rowers grab the rope, but pulling the rope requires energy.
Right.
And this brings us to one of the most fascinating deductions in the research. We typically think of energy, specifically ATP, the cellular energy currency, as the fuel required to flex or contract a muscle. But that's actually entirely backwards, isn't it?
It is entirely backwards.
Right.
The myosin heads actually use the energy from ATP to detach from the actin rope so they can reach for the next spot.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they bind and pull naturally, but they need the energy from ATP to let go and reset.
Wait, so energy isn't what makes a muscle flex. Energy is what allows a muscle to relax.
You got it.
Which perfectly explains the mechanics of rigor mortis.
Precisely. People commonly assume that bodies become stiff after death, because the muscles are locked in a state of active contraction.
Right, like they're flexing.
But it's the absence of energy causing the stiffness. When a person dies, their body stops producing ATP because that energy is required to break the bond between the actin and the myosin. Those millions of tiny rowers grab the rope, pull it, and they get permanently stuck.
Because there's no ATP to release the grip.
Exactly. Without ATP, the muscle fibers are locked together, unable to slide back to a relaxed state.
Wow. It's a completely morbid thought, but it perfectly illustrates the underlying chemistry. No energy to let go of the rope, so the system freezes.
It really highlights how crucial ATP is just for relaxation.
So let's zoom back out to the macro level.
Okay.
We all have this exact same hardware. We all have actin and myosin playing tug of war, powered by calcium and ATP.
Right.
So why is it that some people are born to be Olympic sprinters who can explode off the starting blocks with incredible speed, while others are elite marathoners who can literally run for hours without their muscles failing?
Like a great question.
Because if the biological machinery is identical, what is dictating the difference in performance?
Well, it comes down to the metabolic properties of the muscle fibers themselves. While the sliding filament mechanism is universal, the way those fibers process energy varies.
Okay.
Human skeletal muscle is broadly categorized into two types: slow-twitch fibers and fast-twitch fibers.
And the distinction is exactly what it sounds like, but the energy sources are completely different, right?
Yes.
Slow-twitch fibers generate their energy aerobically. They rely on a constant supply of oxygen.
Correct.
Because of this, they contract a bit slower, and they don't produce a massive amount of peak explosive force. But their superpower is that they are incredibly fatigue resistant. As long as you are breathing and supplying oxygen, they will just keep working.
Exactly. On the flip side, fast-twitch fibers generate energy anaerobically.
Meaning without oxygen.
Right, without oxygen.
Okay.
They rely on stored energy sources like glycogen to produce rapid, highly forceful contractions.
But there's a trade-off.
A huge trade-off because they burn through that local fuel supply so quickly, they fatigue almost immediately.
So an elite cross-country skier or an endurance runner who can perform for 3 hours straight, their calf muscles are fundamentally built differently than a sprinter's.
Exactly. The data shows that elite endurance athletes possess a huge predominance of slow-twitch fibers. We're talking sometimes up to 90% in certain muscle groups.
90%.
Yeah. Meanwhile, powerlifters and sprinters have a heavy majority of fast-twitch fibers. And while rigorous training can slightly alter the metabolic efficiency of these fibers, you cannot fundamentally change a slow-twitch fiber into a fast-twitch one.
So you're born with it?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The ratio you have is largely dictated by genetics. It's the biological hand you are dealt.
So we have our specific fiber types, and we have the nervous system firing them. But any good supercomputer isn't just sending orders blindly, right? It has a vast array of sensors constantly feeding data back to the processor to prevent catastrophic failure.
Oh, definitely. And this brings us to proprioceptors.
Let's talk about proprioceptors.
So proprioceptors are specialized sensory receptors embedded directly in your muscles and tendons. They are the body's real-time diagnostic monitors.
Okay.
The two most critical ones for mechanical movement are the muscle spindles and the Golgi tendon organs.
They sound like rival factions because they do the exact opposite things.
They really do.
The muscle spindles live inside the belly of the muscle fiber, and their only job is to detect stretch.
Right.
If a muscle stretches too far or too fast, the spindle panics. It fires an urgent signal to the spinal cord, which triggers an immediate reflex contraction to shorten the muscle and protect it from tearing.
That's the stretch reflex.
Yeah.
The vital safety mechanism. It's actually what keeps you standing upright against gravity.
Really?
Yeah. As you stand still, if you start to sway slightly, your calf muscles stretch. The spindles detect that stretch instantly and command a microcontraction to pull your center of gravity back into alignment.
Oh, wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah, but then you have the Golgi tendon organs,
Right.
which sit right at the junction where the muscle turns into tendon and anchors to the bone.
Yeah.
They don't care about stretch at all. They only care about tension.
Tension, okay.
Right. If the muscle is generating so much force that it threatens to rip the tendon clean off the bone, the Golgi tendon organ overrides everything. It sends a signal that forces the muscle to completely relax. It literally drops the load to save the structural integrity of the joint.
So they act as the ultimate circuit breaker.
Exactly.
So this presents a really interesting practical problem.
Oh, so?
Well, if our muscles have these built-in alarms, specifically the muscle spindles, that naturally want to resist and forcefully contract whenever they're stretched, how does a human being ever get more flexible?
Oh, that's a really good point.
Like, how do you stretch a hamstring when the hamstring's own internal hardware is actively fighting against you?
Well, you have to learn how to speak the nervous system's native language.
Hmm.
You can actually hack these sensors using a technique known as PNF stretching, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation.
PNF stretching. So inputting a biological cheat code to bypass the firewall.
Pretty much.
How does the execution of that actually work?
Okay, let's use the hamstring as the example.
Hmm.
Typically, if you just bend over and force a deep stretch, the muscle spindles panic and contract, making the muscle feel tight and rigid.
Right, it hurts and you stop.
Exactly. PNF bypasses this using a contract-relax sequence.
Hmm.
First, you stretch the hamstring to its comfortable limit. But then, instead of just holding it, you actively contract that exact same stretched hamstring against a resistance for about 5 or 6 seconds.
Wait, so you're forcefully flexing the muscle while it is in a stretched position?
Yes.
What does that achieve?
By forcefully contracting the muscle, you generate a massive spike of tension in the tendon.
Oh!
Right. And this sudden tension triggers the Golgi tendon organs. Remember, their entire biological purpose is to detect dangerous tension and force the muscle to shut down and relax to prevent a tear.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Right. So after holding that contraction for 6 seconds, you simply let go. The Golgi tendon organs have just flooded the local nervous system with inhibitory, relaxing signals.
The hamstring just gives up.
Basically, the hamstring experiences a profound, reflexive drop in resistance. The safety brake is temporarily disabled. And in that brief window, you can push the stretch significantly deeper than you could just 10 seconds prior.
That is insane. You are intentionally using the tension sensor to override the stretch sensor.
Exactly. It's called reciprocal inhibition.
That is absolutely fascinating. You're using the body's own safety protocols against itself to achieve a physical result.
It's a literal biological hack.
Wow. Well, let's bring this entire journey into focus. We started up in the corner office, looking at the dense neuron-packed processing power of the cerebellum.
Right.
We traveled down the fiber optic trunk line, jumping at high speeds across the insulated myelin sheath. We saw how local routers in the spinal cord can completely bypass the brain to save us from stepping on a tack.
Yep, the crossed extensor reflex.
Then we zoomed all the way down into the microscopic tug-of-war of actin and myosin, realizing that cellular energy is actually used to relax a muscle, not just flex it.
The rigor mortis effect.
Right. And finally, we learned how to hack our own internal safety sensors to improve our physical flexibility.
You know, when you lay it all out like that, it truly underscores how much we take for granted.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of automated calculations required just to stand up and walk across a room it's staggering.
It really is. Every single movement you make today is a symphony of electrical impulses and chemical reactions firing in a perfect sequence over mere milliseconds. But looking at all of this research, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought about those internal safety limits.
Okay.
We talked extensively about the Golgi tendon organs. We learned that their primary function is to inhibit muscle activation, to literally put the brakes on and stop us from generating so much force that we tear our own tissue.
Right, the circuit breaker.
Exactly. Which begs a profound question. How much of our athletic limit is actually physical? Like, how much of your maximum strength, your absolute ceiling, is dictated by the actual size of your muscles, and how much of it is just your nervous system refusing to take those safety brakes off?
Oh, wow. It forces you to reconsider human potential, really. Because there are highly documented medical cases of ordinary people certainly lifting cars off trapped victims under extreme emotional duress.
Exactly. When we hear about those bursts of superhuman strength during life or death emergencies, what is actually happening?
It's not magic.
No, the body isn't suddenly growing new muscle mass in 10 seconds. The biological hardware is exactly the same as it was yesterday.
Right.
It simply means, though, in a state of absolute crisis, the CEO of the brain finally sends an override code. It shuts off the Golgi tendon organs, disables the circuit breakers, and gives the body permission to recruit 100% of its available motor units simultaneously.
The supercomputer finally removes its own safety protocols.
Yes. So let that thought simmer the next time you're working out or carrying heavy boxes and you feel like your muscles just can't handle another pound. Are you really out of strength, or is your nervous system just trying to keep you safe?